Why doesn't the Leaning Tower of Pisa fall? The nearly 900-year-old tower has had its iconic lean for almost as long as it has existed, allowing it to become a legendary landmark. But believe it or not, it wasn't meant to lean. So what's its history? Why hasn't it tipped over, and what can we learn from it? In 1173, construction of the tower began. It was meant to be a classical Italian bell, or campanile, for the cathedral in Pisa, but the design requirements created an immediate problem. A mighty 8 floors of marble, measuring in at about 154 feet, would not be easy to construct. You see, not only was that much marble extremely heavy, but the soil at the cathedral in Pisa was also extremely soft. This led to the tower beginning to lean after only 3 floors were finished. The weight imbalances during construction caused one side to dig into the soil more than the other, so construction was put on pause for almost 100 years. This pause had the unexpected effect of helping the soil to stabilize and settle. It probably helped to save the tower, but when they resumed the project, the engineers realized that they had to balance out the forces and moments. It had already reached a lean of 3 feet off-center from the base. They decided that the top floors of the tower would have uneven sides. By making the short side of the tower longer than the other side, they aimed to compensate for the lean and improve the equilibrium. This would shift the weight distribution, balancing out the forces and moments from the initial tilt. With this simple solution, they were able to finally finish the tower 100 years later, with the bell being installed at the top of the tower in 1372. But that extra weight caused the tower to sink further into the soft soil. So, by the time it was done, the tower was a whole 4.5 feet off center. So why did it stay standing at this point? Well, the tower was near equilibrium, meaning that the total forces and torques on the tower almost summed to zero. See, usually structures withstand forces and moments because they're fixed into the ground. But in this case, the ground was soft and moved around. Over time, the tilt would just keep increasing, but surely it had to fall eventually, right? Well, crucially, the center of mass of the tower was still above its base. If the center of mass ever moved off the base, then the tower would tip, but since it had only tilted a few degrees, it wasn't going to be tipping anytime soon. But it's been almost 700 years since the tower was completed, so surely the tilt has gotten worse. Well, you would be right if it weren't for all the somewhat recent effort put into restoring the tower. It had found its way to being 7.4 feet out of alignment. In the 20th century, major efforts were made to restore it. First, in 1934, Mussolini ordered for the tower to be completely straightened, as he thought the lean reduced the perceived strength of fascist Italy. Well, whether or not that's true, the engineers decided to pour 200 tons of concrete into the foundation of the tower, but this just made the problem worse, putting the lean at 17 feet by 1964. Now there was a serious threat that the tower might fall, so the Italians had to act fast. But how could they fix the problem after it got so bad? First, they needed to secure the tower in case of slips. Steel cables were installed around the 3rd floor and secured hundreds of meters away to keep the tower in place. Then, like the original designers did in 1272, they decided to strategically add weights. Lead weights were placed at the opposite side of the lean to nudge the tower back into place. Finally, the engineers were ready to implement the permanent solution. In 1999, the engineers decided to remove soil from the north side of the tower to make it sink more on the opposite side of the lean. This addressed the main cause of the problem directly, the problematic soil. The solution was so effective that only 2 years later in 2001, the tilt had almost reduced by 28%, from 5.5 degrees to 3.9. Now, engineers project the tower to be safe for the next 200 to 300 years. At the end of the day, the Tower of Pisa stays standing because engineers have found clever ways to keep the tower at equilibrium. By minimizing the forces and moments and shifting them as close to zero as possible, the tower moves so slowly that engineers have the time to figure out what to do next. And through the Leaning Tower of Pisa, you now know what equilibrium is.